Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's episode on Mormon Stories podcast. This episode is an entry in our LDS Discussion series, which is an attempt to discuss Mormon truth claims based on an objective evaluation of the evidence and to look at those things with as little bias as possible. This series began with the work of a man named Mike, who has since retired, and his website, ldsdiscussions.com, where he did a lot of work on Mormon church truth claims. This series is a series and is best consumed that way. I'll ask Nemo here in just a moment which number we're up to in this series, but I know there are over 60 episodes that kind of build on each other, and so these episodes are best consumed sequentially. I know that John DeLynn constantly says that this series is one of the most important things he's done on Mormon Stories podcast, and I'm happy to be a part of it. I'll be your host today, and my name is Colby Reddish. Let me welcome my two other panelists that will be joining me for today's episode.
Hi.
Julia and Nemo.
Hey,
Julia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. I'm Julia Saunders. I've been on LDS Discussions for a few episodes now. I run the TikTok and Instagram and YouTube Analyzing Mormonism. I'm getting my degree in history, so I'm trying to go the Mormon history angle. Yeah. And then I guess Nemo, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Nemo. I run the Nemo the Mormon YouTube channel and every other social media platform conceivable, although not MySpace, because I think MySpace is too old school even for me. Yeah, you can find me anywhere under the handle Nemo the Mormon. I talk about mainly the behavior of the current institutional church and its leaders. And I've been around on this for a long time now, I think since episode 2.
Yeah, and this is the 71st episode.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Indeed.
Yeah.
71 episodes. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Well, today, Julia, why don't we introduce folks to what we'll be talking about on today's episode of LDS Discussions, which is what happened to the stone box and what was inside it. So I think one of the reasons we wanted to discuss the stone box is we've been really going through a few different episodes here the last little bit since I joined you all, and have been talking about like ways we can think about falsifying the Book of Mormon's claims. So the Book of Mormon makes very particular claims about its world, about the way it was created. And when I use the term falsify, I don't mean like we're looking to find it false. We're just thinking of ways that we can test it in kind of an objective way, the way that scientists think about testing things. So this idea of falsifiability really comes from the hard sciences. And so one of the reasons we wanted to discuss the stone box is so many of the different pieces of evidence that are discussed about Book of Mormon historicity are very subjective, or they no longer exist. Like we don't have access to the plates, for example. But the stone box actually gives us a really interesting opportunity to look at whether at least the box that the plates supposedly were contained in existed in the real world when we look at these early church history accounts about the box. That's kind of the reason that we started on this idea and put these slides together.
Yeah. And then the first slide, I don't know if you've gone over some of these already, Colby.
Yeah, so similar to our episode on the golden plates when we talked about where Joseph Smith may have gotten that idea, it's important to explore where Joseph Smith may have encountered other contemporary ideas about ancient records in a stone box in his neighborhood. It also forms, kind of as I just said, an important piece of archaeological evidence that if it existed, would help bolster Joseph Smith's claims. And of course, as far as is recorded in the Book of Mormon's text, there's nothing special about the stone box that the plates were, kept in for that 1,000-year period. And so it is something that would make sense that it would still exist today if it had truly existed the way that Joseph Smith claimed it did.
Yeah. So the first question I wanted to talk about was what was in the stone box. Now, I know that we've already gone through these slides before, but previous to that, how would you guys have answered that question?
I would have answered the Liahona, the breastplate, the sword of Laban, the plates themselves, the Urim and Thummim, and I think that's it.
Yeah, that's how I feel like that's a very common answer.
I would have said everything except for the Liahona. I wouldn't have included the Liahona in my answer.
Oh, okay. So there's a reason people have these thoughts, and there were some clips shared. So this is a common answer, but it is incorrect. But there is a reason why people have this incorrect idea that all these items, the sword, the Liahona, and all these other things were included. And that's because, generally the church has, when they depict this scene with Moroni bearing the plates, they also often depict him bearing other items. And so we're going to show some of these clips of the church doing that, or church affiliated media. And so this first one comes from this old film called How Rare Possession. It was filmed in 1987. And we're just going to go ahead and play this clip.
And now I bid unto all farewell. I soon go to rest in the paradise of God, until my spirit and body shall again reunite, and I am brought forth triumphant through the air, to meet you before the pleasing bar of the great Jehovah, the eternal judge of both quick and dead. Amen.
Okay, did you guys have any thoughts watching that? Oh, are you muted?
I had so many thoughts.
Go ahead, Nemo.
Well, the music for a start, incredible 80s, slightly modulated music, which is always lovely to hear. Just the way he tries to make the plates seem so heavy, and then the idea that Joseph Smith ran for several miles, at least 3, with them while being attacked by people who chose not to use their weapons in the manner in which those weapons were designed, but instead hit him with them. They took guns and hit him with them, and then managed to somehow fend them off and get back while having a famously bad limp.
Yeah.
And yet you've got muscular Moroni there struggling to pick them up because they would have been just so heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And then, very clearly wrapping up something that is the Liahona in a cloth and putting it down in the hole.
Yeah, and you could see the sword a couple of times.
Yeah.
And there were some other items that looked kind of like a slingshot. I don't even know what he was wrapping up.
But I wonder where possibly people might have got the idea that those things were in the box.
Right. So
I also was just super impressed by his ancient American mullet. I like to see that those date back to 400 AD, apparently.
I think also what's really important here on this point is that similar to depictions of Joseph Smith's translation of the Book of Mormon, the church produces artwork and films to tell a narrative, to inform, to teach, to instruct. So the decisions that are made in producing a film like this are very important and are worthy of scrutiny. Some people might roll their eyes and say, you're just nitpicking an old church film. But why would they put those details in if they didn't want people to walk away with the impression that that is what was present? Those are the objects that were there. So there's a problem in the church producing a film like this with these sorts of inaccuracies.
Yeah, that's the question that doesn't really make sense to me. We can ask that throughout these next few clips too, where we can see by church history that this is not what was in the stone box, but this is an officially approved, this film is made by the church. Why would they perpetuate this false narrative? Which I guess we've seen that in a lot of church history. But if the church can commission a film to be done or pay for it or whatever, and they commission artists to do things, why commission them to do it wrong? Which doesn't really make sense to me.
Yeah.
Right. Because after that decision is made, like, how are we going to tell this story? It is just, it's odd to choose to tell the story incorrectly, like you said, Julia. At least with like the seer stone and the hat, the rock and the hat, you can kind of understand why they wanted to walk away from that because it's weirder. But like including or not including the Liahona, for example, there's really no reason to include it except for just like making a mistake. I don't know. It's very confusing on how that decision would have been made.
Yeah, it's the idea to try and bolster the legitimacy by including, including more artifacts, or is it the idea that, frankly, that idea that those things were in the box has perpetuated for so long that someone put it in because that's just what they believed, and no one thought to fact check it. No one
That's
thought
probably what it is. Yeah,
fact check.
Yeah, I would say that's probably exactly what it is. Is that they just heard it growing up and just recycled what they had heard.
And so we're not saying. Oh, sorry, go on, Julia.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think How Rare a Possession, I remember viewing it in seminary.
Me
Had
too.
you guys seen that? Okay, so so it's not necessarily like, I guess they're doing it for students, so it's not necessarily historical. I'm just trying to figure out why they would do that, but we all watched it in our church.
Well, yeah, I think, like I said, it's not. I was going to say it's not malicious. This isn't the church. I don't think they're deliberately trying to deceive anyone, but I think it does raise an important point about the importance of the accuracy of artwork and film productions, etc., that the church produces, because they do send a message and they do perpetuate potentially false narratives like this.
Right.
Well, at the very least, yeah. So I agree with you. It's about accuracy. But at the very least, so often when people like us are in the post-Mormon space and we might get something slightly inaccurately wrong, I think it's important to point out that a lot of times those inaccuracies result directly from the church's decisions and how it's told its history and taught members about these things. That's number one. And then number two is Mormon church history is like such a mess. Like it is such a hot mess that I can understand if they were looking at like different accounts, they might have gotten confused on exactly what was in the stone box. So people need to give each other a little bit of grace, I guess, when they're kind of recapping that history, because it's so expansive, it's so broad, there's so many different accounts. Those are two takeaways I have.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so moving on with these depictions. This one is from the animated stories, The Living Scriptures, and this was done in 1992. And these are copyrighted, so I couldn't show you guys the clip, but these are images, and you can see
just looking at these, it seems to me like Moroni's mullet is canon. That's what it seems like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because even in the officially published church artwork that's within the the quad, he's a Ric Flair lookalike, I think.
But yeah, we can clearly see here. He's got the plates. He's got the sword. I see something that looks like the Liahona next to the sword. So yeah, we can see these ideas were very.
Is it a sword or is it an umbrella? Because it kind of looks like a brolly to me.
It kind of does, but.
That's probably a sword. Right, let's move on.
Yeah, so this is not officially produced by the church, but yeah, another depiction. This one is Scripture Central, and it's called The Story of the Book of Mormon, and it was filmed in 2019. And I think we've discussed before that Scripture Central is in part funded by the church. Is that correct when I say that?
I don't know if they're directly funded by the church, but they are definitely churches adjacent. So if they're funded by a third-party nonprofit, it's going to be
a couple of steps of separation. But
Okay. So this one, we're going to watch a clip of that and see their depiction.
Wherefore, condemn not the things of God, that you may be found spotless at the judgment seat of Christ. And when you shall receive these things, I would exhort you that you would ask God, the Eternal Father, in the name of Christ, if these things are not true.
So yeah, it showed a depiction of, you could see the plates and it would look like the sword handle wrapped up, and then the Liahona again, I think is what I was seeing. So, and that was more recent. That was 2019, where we're still getting to these incorrect, even though not malicious, these incorrect views of what was buried in the stone box.
It's just basic facts at this point, and kind of to the point Colby was making earlier. Yes, we should give each other grace. I think it's also hard to stomach sometimes when something like Scripture Central that also employs people who come across as quite smug at times, when they're or condescending at times, when they feel like they're setting the record straight. The irony that they're producing material that's just so sort of basically incorrect, not necessarily even particularly important way, but in a way that they are claiming to be authorities and defenders of the church and people that can that can set the record straight and correct all our misinformation that we're apparently peddling, and they're producing videos that just aren't correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems like anymore with the depictions that I was looking up when I was trying to find these clips, most of people depict anymore just the plates. They don't even depict the breastplate and the Urim and Thummim. It's just the plates inside the stone box, which it seems like a safer thing than adding everything. But yeah.
It is also one thing I'm just struck by, I guess, thinking back on that first film and the other depictions where we've got multiple different artifacts in the stone box. I guess one of the things I'm struck by is we very much know that this was Joseph Smith's worldview, right, from his time as a treasure digger. And then from his time after the Book of Mormon's production, where it seemed like Joseph Smith couldn't, walk 10 feet without tripping over some magical artifact, right? So he finds like different versions of plates. Some of them end up being fraudulent, like the Kinderhook plates. He's involved in finding those, or at least, purporting to translate one line from them. The Book of Abraham materials, like not only does he find a scroll that he attributes to Abraham and translates, he finds another scroll that he attributes to Joseph out of Egypt. I guess I'm just struck by it's so interesting that Joseph Smith seemed to have this worldview where you find these magical artifacts, and that's kind of what we see echoed in these incorrect depictions of what's in the stone box, is this collection, like this treasure trove of artifacts from the Book of Mormon's narrative. So I can understand why, if people have grown up with that conception, it's going to make the Book of Mormon more real to you, right? Like not only did the plates exist, but also the Liahona existed, and also the sword existed, and also these other materials existed. It just makes it more grounded in reality. All right, so now that we've talked about those depictions, let's talk about the next one you pulled, Julia.
Yeah, so this one is from the Visitor Center on Temple Square. I'm pretty sure it's still there. This is a painting of Moroni, and he's got the sword, he's got the Liahona, he's got the plates, and then I guess a bundle of parchment or something. I'm not exactly sure what that is. I mean, I guess he might not be burying the sword, but anyway, it's just certainly the Liahona is there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That box looks really small though anyway, just more depictions of maybe an incorrect view of history.
And again, this is where the church is, like the visitor center is where the church is saying to people who are not members of the faith, who want to learn about the faith, come and see about our church. Mm-hmm. And they've got this painting up, which clearly depicts things, so people are going to leave with an impression, however small, that those were the objects involved in that act, and they weren't necessarily.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so if we go further into the Joseph Smith history, the historical record, so those things were not in the stone box. Mm-hmm. And so he records, he says, having removed the earth, I obtained a lever, which I got fixed under the edge of the stone, and with a little exertion raised it up. I looked in, and there indeed did I behold the plates, the Urim and Thummim, and the breastplate, as stated by the messenger. The box in which they lay was formed by laying stones together in some kind of cement. In the bottom of the box were laid 2 stones crossways of the box, and on these stones laid the plates, and other things with them. And so I'm kind of having a hard time crossways of the box. Mm-hmm. Does that mean like they have the stone box, and then there's like stones sitting on the bottom, or how do you guys picture that?
I picture like 2 stones at the bottom, like railway tracks, sort of parallel to each other, running across the bottom of the box.
Oh, okay.
On which.
Yeah, it depends on if it means, I think what it comes down to is, does it mean crossways with each other or crossways with the box? Because you could kind of read it either way.
Okay.
So railroad tracks would be crossways with the box. Crossways with each other, you would have like an X at the bottom formed by these stones.
That would be kind of, right. I feel like that railroad tracks makes a lot more sense in my head.
Me too.
For that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the purpose of them, I would assume, is to kind of keep the plates from the bottom, to allow them to be lifted out. Perhaps the D-rings on the bind the plates together aren't sufficiently strong to carry the plates by, and so you need to be able to get purchase underneath. If they're as heavy as our man Ric Flair made them look, then if they're that heavy, then you wouldn't want to put them right into the bottom of the box. They'd crush your fingers.
Yeah, he
Right.
may also be worried about the elements, like if a little bit of water gets into the bottom of the box from time to
Oh,
time, he
that's
may be
true.
worried about
Yeah.
corrosion.
Yeah, gold, that famously corroding
Would
metal.
gold?
Yeah.
I still feel like gold, and of course, people argue that it's tumbaga. It's not an actual just gold, but like I feel like if it's sitting on something for 1,000 years, whatever, wouldn't the softness of the metal kind of form around that? I feel like that could make indents, but I don't really know much about
I
metal.
wouldn't be surprised if the bottom of the plates on sort of each edge had a ridge in them from sitting on those plates on
Right.
those stones for 1,000 years, or perhaps even that the leaves had sagged because
Right.
over 1,000 years of gravity, you get a little bit of that.
Well, and
action, but-
especially if they ruffle like paper
yeah,
or whatever Emma described it as.
yeah.
Anyway, I'm getting distracted, but here it's listing the 3 items: plates, Urim and Thummim, and the breastplate.
Well, and that's the way in which the bottom portion, because we always assume it's the bottom portion that's sealed, right?
Oh yeah,
So unless the way in which that's sealed provides structural integrity.
they do. The witnesses do say it was hard like wood. So
Yeah.
like maybe there was something stronger there than the plates themselves that sitting on those rocks wouldn't have made a huge difference. But anyway, so this next part is where I think that maybe some of this people got these artists or these movie makers got the wrong idea.
Do you want me to read this one, Julia?
Yes, that'd be great.
Yeah, so this comes from a revelation given to Joseph Smith in 1829, June 1829, and it's recorded today at Doctrine and Covenants 17. So this is where it's talking about the 3 witnesses, or the revelation about the 3 witnesses. It says, a revelation to Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, and Martin Harris, given Fayette, Seneca County, New York, given previous to them having a view of the plates, etc. Behold, I say unto you that you must rely upon my word, which if you do with full purpose of heart, you shall have a view of the plate, and also the breastplate, the sword of Laban, the Urim and Thummim, which was given to the brother of Jared upon the mount when he talked with the Lord face to face, and the marvelous directors, which was given to Lehi, while in the wilderness on the borders of the Red Sea. And it is by your faith that you shall obtain a view of them, even by that faith which was had by the prophets of old. And after that you had obtained faith and have seen them with your eyes, you shall testify of them by the power of God. And this you shall do, that my servant Joseph Smith Jr. may not be destroyed, that I may bring about my righteous purposes unto the children of men in this work, and ye shall testify that ye have seen them, even as my servant Joseph Smith Jr. has seen them. For it is by my power that he has seen them, and it is because he had faith.
Yeah. Okay, so this is why I think, because the witnesses said that they were going to be able to see these things: a view of the plates, the breastplate, the sword of Laban, the Urim and Thummim, and the directors, or the Liahona. And so like this is where I'm thinking, and we can see this with the first vision too, where people were getting, like you see later in the Journal of Discourses, where Heber C. Kimball and Brigham Young were talking about the first vision, but they were getting the first vision mixed up with this encounter with Moroni in his bedroom, where these stories aren't totally clear. And this might be one of those same stories, but even this is like 2019, where we're still getting these incorrect ideas. Also, I highlighted the part where it says they obtained a view even by faith, because we've gone over this on LDS discussions before, is that the witnesses said that they viewed the plates and all these items based on a vision that they were having, or based on just like not a physical experience, but just more of a spiritual one. And so I thought that was an interesting section.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also very interesting that this adds further to the idea that the plates and the witnesses saw the plates with a sort of spiritual view and a spiritual eye. You know, that language is very clear here.
Yeah. So there's another source from David Whitmer in an interview with Orson Pratt. Nemo, do you want to read this one?
Yeah, sure. Hang on. There we go. Elder Orson Pratt, do you remember what time you saw the plates? David Whitmer said, it was in June 1829, the latter part of the month, and the 8 witnesses saw them, I think, the next day or the day after, i.e. 1 or 2 days after. Joseph showed them the plates himself, but the angel showed us the 3 witnesses the plates, as I suppose to fulfill the words of the book itself. Martin Harris was not with us at the time. He obtained a view of them afterwards, the same day. Joseph, Oliver, and myself were together when I saw them. We not only saw the plates of the Book of Mormon, but also the brass plates, the plates of the Book of Ether, the plates containing the records of the wickedness and secret combinations of the people of the world down to the time of their being engraved, and many other plates. The fact is, it was just as though Joseph, Oliver, and I were sitting just here on a log when we were overshadowed by a light. It was not like the light of the sun, nor like that of a fire, but more glorious and beautiful. It extended away around us. I cannot tell how far, but in the midst of this light, about as far as he sits, pointing to John C. Whitmer, sitting a few feet from him, there appeared, as it were, a table with many records or plates upon it, besides the plates of the Book of Mormon. Also the sword of Laban, the directors, i.e. the ball, which Lehi had, and the interpreters. I saw them just as plain as I see this bed, striking the bed beside him with his hand. And I heard the voice of the Lord as distinctly as I ever heard anything in my life, declaring that the records of the plates in the Book of Mormon were translated by the gift and power of God. Elder Orson Pratt asks, did you see the angel at this time? David Whitmer says, yes, he stood before us. Our testimony as recorded in the Book of Mormon is strictly and absolutely true as it is there written. Now, really quickly here, it says, we saw the plates just as though Joseph and Oliver were sitting here on a log. He says it's as real as, but saying just as though is implying, but it wasn't so. It is as though it were like this, but it actually wasn't, because I'm accepting that this was a miraculous visitation of some kind, or it was a visionary experience or whatever. In this, a lot of the times, apologists will point to this and say, well, he was very clear. It was just as though it was in front of his eyes. Yes, just as though, but in fact, not so. It was something else. It was a different kind of experience. Now, if you believe in miraculous appearances, which I assume you would if you believe in the first vision, then these angelic or deific visitations are possible. But I think we do need to accept at least that that's what they were, or that's what the witnesses believed them to be, either visionary or miraculous in some way. We don't get to look at them as some sort of naturalistic evidence for the Book of Mormon by saying, oh yeah, no, we just picked up a genuine historical artifact, the gold plates, just like any other thing that we would pick up. No, you don't get to say that, because it's very clear that that isn't what's going on here. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's very supported by like even the way Paul in the New Testament describes his vision, right? Like whether it was in the body or out of the body, I cannot tell. But I think if you just look at everything he records happening to bolster your point, look at what he says. They saw not only the plates of the Book of Mormon, but also the brass plates and the plates of the Book of Ether, which are supposed to have contained a vision that the brother of Jared had of everything that happens in the history of the world, plus the plates containing the records of the wickedness and secret combinations, plus many other types of plates. How could this have even happened in a naturalistic model? How many plates were like set down in front of them? That's like 5 different compilations of records, right? Plates of the Book of Mormon, plates of brass, plates of Book of Ether, records of the wickedness and secret combinations, and then many other plates. There's 5 types of records there. Like, how exactly naturalistically is this even working? This is where when you start looking at what these individuals said, you can start to see like it can't have been a naturalistic historical experience, because that just doesn't make any sense. That like what, the angel came and set down like 5 different stacks of plates on a table? Like, how exactly was this working?
Yeah. Yeah, as you were reading Nemo, that's all I could think about was like, it really just does sound like a spiritual experience. And if you guys haven't seen the episodes that we've done on the 3 and 8 witnesses and the other witnesses of the golden plates, I recommend that you go back, and I can add those into the show notes, because I think we picked out 13 different accounts of them saying, of the 3 and 8 saying that this was a spiritual experience. And so that's just what this sounds like to me.
And I think what apologists then take from that, and what they are trying to fight against often, is, well, if it's a spiritual experience, you're trying to say it's not true. No, I'm just trying to put it in the correct category of evidence. Right. I don't mind if that is what you want to base your belief on, a spiritual experience, because people claim spiritual experiences all the time. Like you said, Christianity has some very strong spiritual experiences, the vision of Paul on the road to Damascus, right? So they're just as important to people of faith. That's not what we're saying here. We just want them put in the correct category of evidence, right?
Yeah.
And understood in their proper context.
Yeah.
Which I think links back to that I know like Brent Metcalf is a big proponent of there were no plates at all. I kind of am agnostic on whether there were some rudimentary plates that Joseph Smith fashioned together or if there weren't. But to bolster his point, that Revelation recorded as Doctrine and Covenants 17 that we looked at just a moment ago does make really clear, like repeatedly, that this is going to be seen through the eye of faith or because of these individuals' faith, which does kind of prompt the question then, if that's the case, is this really a naturalistic experience? Like, is this a historical experience or is it more of a visionary experience? If it is, then why the need to repeatedly appeal to faith to be able to see things if these are just actual, normal, everyday, like historical artifacts?
Right. I will say, I think it's Dan Vogel's theory, and I apologize if I'm getting this incorrect, that he thinks that, to my understanding, that there were a set of plates of some fashion. And Joseph, when he comes back from retrieving the plates, he says he has a dislocated thumb. And I think his father has to have him reset it. But I think Dan Vogel was of the mindset that maybe while he was bending the D-shaped rings, which would have been maybe the last step in creating these tin or whatever plates, like maybe he dislocated his thumb while he was trying to push it together. So I just kind of like that theory that there were plates, but not the way Joseph was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the next section is the sources on the stone box, meaning the box that Joseph Smith said he found the golden plates in. So this was
actually, can you go back to the last slide really quickly, sure. Julia? I'm sorry. So one thing we didn't mention is there is this table that has all of these records, but here David Whitmer does mention the Sword of Laban, the directors, which means the Liahona, and then the interpreters, the Urim and Thummim. So it is interesting, I guess, that you can say, at least for the Liahona and the sword, like, why is this traced back or included in some of these accounts? Well, because David Whitmer indicated in this account that the Liahona was included, right? That's probably where it's coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah, something I just wanted to add. I just went, because there's an episode I'm working on currently myself, and I've looked at something Emerson Ballard said when he was at a meeting of religious leaders, I think in Canada perhaps. He essentially said, well, even if you saw the plates, you wouldn't believe. So I think it's also understood by, I mean, he's dead now, but very recent church leaders, that seeing the physical plates isn't enough to make someone believe. Actually, there has to be a spiritual component here. So again, even the modern leaders, they're not relying on naturalistic evidences for the Book of Mormon when it comes to things like the gold plates and the witnesses. The witnesses aren't a naturalistic explanation for the Book of Mormon, because they will say, well, even if we could produce the plates, you still wouldn't believe. There's clearly got to be something else there.
Colby, can you speak on that? Like, that's super interesting. This idea of, like, because you're talking about falsifying. That's how we started this episode. Falsifiable evidence or whatever. Like, if people are basing it off of faith, where it's like, oh, if you even saw them, if they were really in front of you, you wouldn't believe. So you have to have faith that they're...
It's unfalsifiable.
Right.
Well, this, this connects back to the New Testament, whether it's the story of doubting Thomas or the story recorded in Luke 24, the road to Emmaus. This is the exact point that's made at multiple places in the New Testament, which is, more blessed are you if you believe without having seen, right? And that is captured also in the Book of Mormon. I'll just say, like, epistemologically, the problem with that, from my point of view, is the special pleading problem that Nemo was talking about earlier when he talked about people in other faith traditions also have very powerful spiritual experiences and miraculous claims. How do you preference the one or the other? I've never really found any compelling or consistent way to do that. You basically have to preference, whether it's Catholic claims about the miracle at Fatima or the claims here that we're talking about, which are miraculous claims about the Book of Mormon's origins. You kind of have to pick or choose which of those you're going to preference. Or if I think you understand a little bit more about the cognitive science of religion and the expectation that goes into creating spiritual experiences, I can't remember if we talked about this already in the course of this series, but there's this great TEDx talk from like 10, maybe 12 years ago called This Is Your Brain on God, that was filmed at University of Utah's like medical center. And the person who's presenting, his name is Michael Ferguson. One of the things that he shares is they asked people, and specifically they asked people in the Mormon population, because this happened in Salt Lake, this study, they asked people to rate how powerful a spiritual experience they were feeling when they were having experiences with in-group spiritual quotes and out-group spiritual quotes. And the thing that's probably unsurprising to people is that people who are in the in-group Mormon group, they resonated or reported feeling the Spirit at a higher level when they were experiencing in-group, like Mormon leaders. I believe it was Dieter Uchtdorf, Jeffrey Holland, and I can't remember who the third one was all of a sudden. Oh, it was President Monson. It happened when President Monson was the prophet. And all of them reported having higher spiritual experiences or higher level of spirituality with those in-group quotes versus out-group quotes. The trick of the study was that all of the quotes, including the ones from the in-group and the out-group leaders, were actually from C.S. Lewis. So this higher level of spirituality that people were reporting experiencing was based entirely upon the fact that they thought the origin of that quote was an in-group spiritual leader, even though it wasn't. And I think that when you understand some of this psychology behind these things, you can start to see that exactly to what Nemo said. I don't look at the witnesses' accounts or accounts of early church history like this and say, David Whitmer, for example, the one we just looked at, is lying. I think David Whitmer is doing his best to describe a really ethereal, hard to grasp experience. And for people who've had spiritual experiences, whether in or out of the church, you recognize that you really can't capture something that's like ineffable and describe it in a way like it's something that naturalistically happened. You're describing an experience that's much harder to capture than that. And then people can decide, like, am I going to base my decisions for my life and those stakes on other people's spiritual experiences, or can I validate their spiritual experiences and recognize maybe there's some expectation fulfillment going on, maybe there's inherently subjectivity in all of these experiences? I guess what I'm saying is you don't have to believe someone's account simply because you understand and accept that they're probably trying to accurately report that account to you. You can still say, I can accept the validity of them reporting this account to me, but it doesn't mean that all their claims about objective reality, the way reality works, follow on from accepting that they're trying to accurately state back some spiritual experience to me. At least that's the way I make sense of this.
And drawing us back to the stone box, I think the stone box represents a part of the tension within Mormonism between the need to rely on spiritual experience to make it work and the idea that there is also a need to ground it in archaeological history, in real physical history, because it claims to be a real physical record of things that happened in that time and space. That is what it claims in and of itself. And so you can't just retreat entirely into, well, it's just a realm of spirituality. If Joseph Smith's claims had been, God has revealed to me this new book of scripture, doesn't relate to any specific ancient people or persons, it's just a new book of revealed scripture, then you can completely fall back into these sort of spiritualistic arguments. But he claimed that God revealed to him an ancient book of scripture, perhaps because he felt that gave it more authenticity. Not sure, can't really speak to that. But when the claims around the book are grounded in physical reality, then they become testable by physical reality. And that's, I think, a tension that really is at the core of Mormonism.
Yeah, and that tension, the reason I had the idea of doing this episode in the first place is as I was experiencing my faith crisis, I was kind of shocked to realize I had never actually asked the question of, like, does that stone box actually exist? Like, has it ever been found? Has it been archaeologically studied? I'd never even asked that question because, and that's such an interesting epistemological problem to me, because it is a very easy way for us to say, okay, let's accept the narrative that the plates had to be taken back to heaven, right? Let's accept the idea that we don't know exactly what was in that stone box. Regardless, the stone box existed for over 1,000 years. It should exist today, or we should have some account of what happened to it, because we know that people remained in that area around where Cumorah was for a long time in the early church. And so it just is. And then when we look at patterns of how many things from early church history have been retained and held in like vaults, like the seer stones, or I know, Julio, you've got a fun find that you wanted to add at the end of the episode. It is a little hard to believe the inconsistency of no one kept track of what happened to the stone box, but everybody hung on to like these, you know, rocks that Joseph Smith had at various times in his life. That inconsistency, I think, is really hard to square.
Right. Nemo, I wanted to ask him, when Ballard, would you say it was Ballard that said that? If you saw it, did he explain why people wouldn't believe if they saw?
No. He essentially made arguments around how it's all about faith. You've just got to have faith.
Okay, well, I feel like that's sort of a fallacy of some sort, where it's like, anyway.
Well, it's almost like it feels like it's slightly like a no true Scotsman fallacy in that there is no conditions under which you would actually be satisfied.
Right.
You're kind of making assumptions about that.
Yeah, it's giving strong my girlfriend goes to another school energy.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so going back, this next section is the sources on the stone box that Joseph Smith said he found in Palmyra. This first one, I think we said it's a I can't remember how to pronounce this. Giaga.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nemo, do you mind reading this account?
That's absolutely fine. I've noticed that whenever you ask me if I mind do something, I say yes, as though it's the affirmative, when that would be incorrect. So I'm working on that. Okay, so Giaga Gazette, 16th November, 1830. Delusion. The account which they give is substantially as follows. At a recent period, an angel appeared to a poor, ignorant man residing in or near Palmyra in Ontario County, the state of New York, directed him to open the earth at a place designated, where he would find the new revelation engraved on plates of metal. In obedience to the celestial messenger, Smith repaired to the spot, and on opening the ground, discovered an oblong stone box, tightly closed with cement. He opened the sacred depository and found enclosed a bundle of plates resembling gold, carefully united at one edge with 3 silver wires, so that they opened like a book. The plates were about 7 inches long and 6 broad, and the whole pile was about 6 inches deep, each plate about the thickness of tin. They were engraved in a character unintelligible to the learned men of the United States, to many of whom it is said to have been presented.
Yes, we have the account of, and he's just talking about the cement. This is also, I was just thinking, this also predates the first vision accounts. So they're talking about the only messenger that Joseph encountered, as far as the historical record, is just the angel who is called Nephi and Moroni. So yeah, that's just one of the first accounts. And then Oliver Cowdery has one. This is from 1834.
Yeah, hang on. Just before you jump on that,
sure.
Sorry. I think, it's really important to mention that actually, why have they not mentioned the first vision? Because the first vision story isn't being told yet. That would absolutely be part of this narrative. They would start there. They would say, God told him to do this. Then an angel took him to get the plates, right? So yeah, that's a really good point, Julia.
Yeah, and there's complete absence. Like, there's nothing in the historical record that I can find until way later that he ever saw God or Jesus. Yeah. Okay, so with this next one is Oliver Cowdery. Colby, do you mind reading these
Nope,
slides?
not at all. So this comes from Oliver Cowdery in 1834, 1836. It probably is 1834 to 1836 journal. Is that right, Julia?
Yeah.
Okay. So he says, first a hole of sufficient depth, how deep I know not, was dug. At the bottom of this was laid a stone of suitable size, the upper surface being smooth. At each edge was placed a large quantity of cement. And into this cement, at the 4 edges of this stone, were placed erect 4 others, their bottom edges resting in the cement at the outer edges as the first stone. The 4 last named, when placed erect, formed a box. The corners, or where the edges of the 4 came in contact, were also cemented so firmly that the moisture from without was prevented from entering. Well, there goes my concern, right? It is to be observed also that the inner surface of the 4 erect or side stones was smooth. This box was sufficiently large to admit a breastplate, such as was used by the ancients to defend the chest, etc., from the arrows and weapons of their enemy. And then it continues, from the bottom of the box, or from the breastplate, arose 3 small pillars, composed of the same description of cement used on the edges. And upon these 3 pillars was placed the record of the children of Joseph, and of a people who left the tower far, far before the days of Joseph, or a sketch of each, which had it not been for this, and the never-failing goodness of God, we might have perished in our sins, having been left to bow down before the altars of the Gentiles, and to have paid homage to the priests of Baal. I must not forget to say that this box containing the record was covered with another stone, the bottom surface being flat and the upper crowning. But those 3 pillars were not so lengthy as to cause the plates and the crowning stone to come in contact. I have now given you, according to my promise, the manner in which the record was deposited.
When would Oliver Cowdery ever have seen this box?
he would not have.
Because
Which is one of the ironic things about this account is all of this he's receiving secondhand, which if you go back for a second, Julia,
Sure.
is interesting that he starts and says, first, a hole of sufficient depth, how deep I know not. He doesn't know any of this for himself. He's hearing it all through Joseph Smith at best.
And then he's saying, that it is to be observed, but not by you, Oliver. You never observed it firsthand, right? I'm kind of making a joke there, but he is recounting this incredible detail, almost as though when people aren't telling the truth, they sometimes feel as though if they add more detail, it will be more believable and more credible. Because there's stuff in here about creating. Why does he need to say that these pillars were tall enough to hold the plates, but not so tall as to cause the plates to hit the lid of the box? That seems just self-evident. Who was looking at that going, oh, well, there's these little pillars, but I guess I assume the plates got squished by the lid then? No one's thinking that. There's just these unnecessary little details that I think is just him sort of riffing, perhaps, or just trying to add more credibility to an account of something he never saw.
It's also interesting that he builds in like the significance of the record in what he's reporting as just like the history around where the plates were found. So he has this whole thing in the middle about the sketch of these different civilizations, which had it not been for this and the never failing goodness of God, we might have perished in our sins and been left to bow down before the altars of the Gentiles. This is just very aligned with like Joseph Smith's first vision account, the 1838. Is that what it is? 1838 account is the one that's in the scriptures, right?
Yes, 38,
where, Joseph Smith is told purportedly by Jesus Christ that all the professors are corrupt, that all the creeds are an abomination in his sight. This looks very akin to what Joseph Smith was thinking then, which we know like his universalism or his ecumenicalism kind of waxed and waned over the course of his life, depending on how he felt about other denominations. So it's interesting to see that at least now Oliver Cowdery is building this same like, but for Mormonism, but for the Book of Mormon, we would have perished in our sins. That's a very interesting kind of insight, I guess, into what's going on in his mind.
And also the way he says that we would be left to bow down before the altars of the Gentiles. Does this show that at this early point, there was a belief that Mormonism represented a branch of the House of Israel, that, Mormons essentially aren't Gentiles in some way? Because, that is implicit in Mormon belief, is that Mormons aren't Gentiles. That's what your patriarchal blessing tells you. That's what kind of the concepts of Mormonism teach you. You're no longer a Gentile. You're part of the House of Israel, adopted in.
Yeah. That's not all that surprising to me because this comes from the 1834, 1836 history. So that is a message that's like replete throughout the Book of Mormon. Yeah. So that's probably where he's picking it up.
But it's already, my point is, at this point already, it's making its way into the narrative that is being formed about the religion itself, not just about the book, but about the Mormon Church.
Right. Did you have anything else on this one, Julia, that was interesting to you?
Yeah, so I just wanted to remind the audience that so far in the record, and then we'll talk about these other ones later, but Emma was the only one that went with him to retrieve the plates, and even she didn't go all the way with him. So only Joseph has seen this stone box as far as this record so far, and then we're going to go chronologically. But also one thing that I wanted to point out is he alludes to the Book of Ether, where he says that the tower, the people who left the tower. Recently, John Dehlin had Bart Ehrman on Mormon Stories, and he talks about how the Tower of Babel is just the first 12 chapters of Genesis are just like more myth than actual history, and how this was just somebody came up with this, how people have different languages, and it's not actually history. And so like that's another one of those things about the Book of Mormon that make it not historical to me. But it's interesting that Oliver is talking about it here.
Yeah, and having been part of that episode, which I tried not to fangirl about talking to Bart Ehrman too much, but one of the things he talked about is that primeval history that is Genesis 1 through 11 was not written until the Jews were in exile in 587, which is the exact destruction that they were in First Nephi that they're talking about leaving to avoid. So you've got a real chicken and egg problem when you start to understand critical scholarship about how the Bible came to be. And one of the things I really liked about that episode with Dr. Ehrman is he talked about his intention for doing these things. And I think his intention is very aligned with what we try and do in this series, which is we're not trying to take away from faith or take away people's belief in these things. I think you really can't have faith in something unless you actually understand what you're believing based on faith and what you're believing based on evidence. And the evidence says that early history, that Genesis 1 through 11, wasn't written until the exile because it was serving a certain rhetorical purpose of helping tell the etiological stories for the children of Israel and where they came from. And so that's how scholars have made sense of this. That poses a huge problem for Book of Mormon historicity in the story of the brass plates, but people can still have faith and find meaning and value in the narrative of the Book of Mormon or in what the Book of Mormon has done for their lives. I think you can't have faith unless you adequately understand, again, what you're believing based on evidence, what most people are going to believe about history versus what you are believing based on faith.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that. So these next two slides are just images from the Book of Mormon evidence website. And I just never really seen this idea of the three pillars. And then I never really understood the crossways stones. So it seems like most of these accounts, they talk about the plates sitting on something. So here's a depiction of the three pillars of the plates sitting on those. And then there's another one here where, again, you see the three little pillars made of the same cement. I just thought that was really interesting. I wanted to share that because that's never been a part of my experience.
Yeah, going back to the pillars or the crosswise stones like we talked about, since we do have from Oliver Cowdery this idea that the stone box kept out all moisture, it does to me suggest, especially when we think of that 1987 film when the plates like had that loud thud, it does make me think the reason for these pillars or for the plates being raised off the bottom of the box in some way, it has to be because of the weight, like that you need to be able to get underneath the plates to lift them. It seems very clear to me, like going through these slides.
Yeah, I would agree.
I still struggle with the idea if they were between 30 and 50 pounds, depending on which witness, that's still a lot of weight. But yeah.
Yeah, the idea that you think about the ergonomics of that for a moment, reaching down into a box to pick them out. Like, I'm surprised the story isn't that Joseph stepped into the box and kind of hefted them out or something, because just mechanically getting them out from a physiological perspective and so from an ergonomic perspective, it sounds quite difficult actually.
But I guess if the D-shaped rings,
pulling strength, like he was deadlifting a lot or something.
Oh yeah.
That's where he got his stick pull ability.
Well, yeah, the stick pull ability, that's what it is, right? It's all those years of stick pull.
There we go.
Being raised up.
He was prepared for a time such as this. Yeah,
indeed.
Okay, so there's some more slides from Joseph Smith's history. I'll read this one. This is from 1838. Convenient to the village of Manchester, Ontario County, New York, stands a hill of considerable size, and the most elevated of any in the neighborhood. I wonder if that's actually accurate. On the west side of the hill, not far from the top, under a stone of considerable size, lay the plates, deposited in a stone box. This stone was thick and rounding in the middle on the upper side, and thinner towards the edges, so that the middle part of it was visible above the ground, but the edge all around was covered with earth. The box in which they lay was formed by laying stones together in some kind of cement. In the bottom of the box were laid two stones crossways of the box, and on these stones lay the plates and the other things with them. So again, I guess I'm just also getting this image of, so originally I was thinking it was all cement, but it seems like it's stone, like maybe square-shaped stones. But also if water were to get in, like we were talking about here, wouldn't it still be in it? Or like, I don't know, some kind of debris or whatever.
Get out again.
Right.
I'm looking at the Wikipedia entry for the Hill Cumorah. And it very much seems to be prominent, but not the tallest around.
I guess I was thinking, because I've been there and I don't remember, I didn't think to like measure in accordance with the other ones around it. But this just also sounds like Joseph, where he's sort of like, oh, this is the biggest one that you can see. He just sort of has this like, I don't know. how to word that, but like this air.
I
of,
think
like,
in the
trying to make
business we
best.
call that delusions of grandeur. Yeah.
Right.
always trying to make it bigger, better, right? The New Testament has one apostle that lives forever. The Book of Mormon has 3, for
Right.
example.
And then this guy brings these 2 random mummies, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, this is like this princess." And then I can't remember who the other character was, but was it Joseph? I can't remember who the other character was. But like these are prominent people in history, and he just always makes delusions of or grandeur, however you said it.
Yeah. One of the things I'm struck by here is again we see this reference to the 2 stones laid crosswise, where Oliver Cowdery, who's getting his information presumably secondhand from Joseph Smith, talks about these 3 pillars. So it's interesting that we've got the same purpose being served of lifting the plates off the ground, but even there, like at a fundamental level, Oliver Cowdery would only be able to get this information from Joseph Smith. He was the only one who had a firsthand account or encounter with this box. And yet there's disagreement between them on like some basic stuff about how this was put together. It's just interesting. I don't know exactly what to make of that.
Well, and quickly too, because so his is from 34 to 36, and this is 38. So you could say even within like a 4 year or so, I don't know, just the stories are just not quite aligning. Yeah. So there's another account by William Appleby from 1848. Nemo,
Do you want me to read this one?
Oh, sure.
Go ahead.
Go for Colby.
Okay. So William Appleby in 1848 said a hole of sufficient depth had been dug and a flat stone laid at the bottom. Then there were four set erect at the outer edges of the bottom stone, joined together with some form of cement, so as to form a box. On the bottom stone was laid a shield or breastplate. From that arose 3 pillars formed of cement. On the top of these pillars laid the record. So I'll just pause for a second and say, This sounds very similar to the Oliver Cowdery account, including the pillars arising from the breastplate, which I'm not even sure how that makes like sense.
Any sense.
Like any type of sense. But the text is close enough. Even a hole of sufficient depth had been dug. I would guess that Appleby's account is textually dependent on Oliver Cowdery's that we read earlier. But I'll go ahead
and say the same thing. Just before you jump back in, I think it's very interesting that I believe some accounts seem to indicate that the stone for the top of the box just sits proud above the ground, and other accounts are indicating that it had to be dug down for.
Right.
That's just an important thing to note.
And Joseph's, the one we just read, talked about how the edges of the top stone were basically buried with a little bit of earth, and he had to uncover them. This one has the same thing, so I'll continue. So it says, from that arose the 3 pillars formed of cement. On top of these pillars laid the record, together with the Urim and Thummim, the whole not extending quite even with the top of the side stones. Over the whole was placed a crowning stone, a small part of which was visible when he first visited the spot. Each plate was about 6 by 8 inches and as thick as common tin, and in each side, beautiful engraved and filled with black cement, the whole being about 6 inches in thickness and put together with 3 rings running through the whole part of which was sealed. The unsealed parts has been translated and contains the Book of Mormon, and living witnesses who have seen the plates and hefted them have borne testimony to the same.
So when they say a hole of sufficient depth had been dug, I think then maybe I'm misunderstanding that. And what they're saying is they're describing the way in which the box was brought about in the first place, that a hole had to be dug and then into it was set stones, etc.
Right.
Yeah, which is the way Oliver Cowdery recounts it. Basically, they dig a hole, they put stones all along the edges and on the bottom, and then you've got the top and the pillars.
Yeah.
It is interesting right here where he says that the engravings were filled with black cement. Like I think I had heard that there was like some kind of black whatever, but I hadn't heard the word cement used. That's really interesting.
What black cement is?
It's so interesting that, we saw this a little bit when we did the gold plates episode. There were so many disparate accounts of like the dimensions, the weight, the appearance of the gold plates. For example, I remember Josiah Stoll records them being of like a greenish hue and like a greenish rock, maybe, if I'm remembering correctly. And it just makes me wonder, like, if you sketched all of these accounts together, there's no way to completely reconcile them, right? Like there's no consistent description. This is the only description I've ever seen that says the engravings on the plates were filled with some type of cement.
But that's the idea of the sort of black cement is the idea that in order to make the engravings stand out, they were filled in, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what's described here.
Mm-hmm.
Which, like I said, is a novel piece of information.
Mm-hmm. Wait, so right here it says, like you had mentioned this earlier, Colby. At the bottom, the bottom stone was laid. On the bottom stone was laid a shield or breastplate, and from that arose the 3 pillars, and then the plate. So, like, that's just a weird, like, sandwich. Anyway,
yes, the breastplate's laying on the bottom of the box, and the breastplate has cement pillars on it.
Which, why not just put it on
then hold the plates. It's odd. It's an odd arrangement.
Yeah, this is from William Appleby's journal, and this is from 1848, so just a few years after Joseph died. He, of course, he's not there when he's either getting this from Oliver, and this is what it sounds like, or from Joseph himself, which, sure, things cannot agree or stack up differently, but it's just really interesting.
I would just like to say I want to be buried in such a way that causes this kind of archaeological confusion. I want to be buried in a way that makes people go, why did they do that? Yeah, they're going to find my skeleton, like, sort of in a weird press-up position or something, or, you know what I mean, held up by weird cement pillars. That's how I want to go. Anyway,
that's great.
Carry on.
So these were a few accounts. I believe this is the section I found, right, Julia?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where we kind of asked the question, did early Mormons believe there was more than one stone box? I think one of the reasons this question is interesting to me is because it helps kind of show the context. Earlier when we were talking about, whether they saw these things with the eye of faith, it was more a spiritual, subjective experience versus like a literal kind of naturalistic experience. To me, the reason that discussion is interesting and important is because it helps tell you about the context that these people lived in, the time that they lived in, the place that they lived in, and kind of the worldview that was prevalent there. For people who don't know, in early America, like today, we're so used to the separation of state and church that it would be very odd for us to have, I guess, unless you're in certain states that are pushing the other direction, to have like, school children in a public school learning to read from the Bible is so weird to us because of the separation of church and state that's evolved. But it wasn't that way back in this day and age. The First Amendment's protection for religious freedom and for religious liberty didn't extend to the states until much later, through the 14th Amendment and a doctrine known in legal circles as the incorporation doctrine. My point here is just that people like Joseph Smith, the people that we're talking about from this worldview, they were taught to read very often from the Bible itself. Like religion was incorporated much more fully into people's everyday lives, as was this kind of folk magic and treasure digging practices, at least for the people that were really involved in the early church's formation, like the Whitmers, the Cowderys, and the Smith family. And so to me, that context is very important to understand the context in which these claims are being made so that you can understand, well, these people saw, they claimed that they saw the Book of Mormon plates and this one stone box. What else did they believe in? Because then it kind of allows us to gauge whether we accept kind of these people's worldview or we don't.
Yeah, I'm taking a class right now in the history of education, and they would use the King James specific version of the Bible as their, if I'm saying this correctly, primer, where these young kids would just recite, and they would just have all of these chapters memorized, which is another thing we talked about in the Could Joseph Smith Write or Dictate a Well-Worded Letter, which is this is history that Joseph Smith was in. He would go to school and this is what he would hear. And so him trying to mimic the King James Bible or to know that so well makes complete sense looking at it historically.
Absolutely. So I pulled together a few accounts where we do have evidence that Martin Harris and some other peoples connected to early church history did believe in more than one stone box on Hill Cumorah. So this account has 3 different witnesses, Ole Jensen, James Keep, and John Godfrey from 1875. They were together in Salt Lake with Martin Harris and receiving one of Martin Harris's final testimonies. So Martin Harris reiterated that he had seen the angel turn the leaves of the plates, and then he added this additional detail after that fact. This is why I think this is a different stone box than the one we've been talking about that held the Book of Mormon plates. So Harris says, I will tell you of the most wonderful thing that happened after Joseph received the plates. 3 of us, myself and 2 more, took some tools and went to the hill to dig for more plates of gold or something, and indeed we found a stone box. We got quite excited and dug around it very carefully, and just when we were ready to lift it up out of the hole, some unseen power slid it back into the hill. We stood and looked at it, and one of us tried to drive a crowbar through the lid to hold it, but the crowbar glanced off and the corner of the lid was chipped off. Sometime that box will be found, and you will find one corner of the lid broken, and you will know that I have spoken the truth. So your thoughts on that account?
It just reminds me of all the treasure hunting that D. Michael Quinn wrote a book, what is it called?
Early Mormonism and the Magic Worldview.
Yes, where he talks about this. So Joseph, I think, started treasure digging in 1820, and here you've got it sinking into the earth, which is a very Book of Mormon thing as well. I don't think the Bible references that part at all. Anyway, this is just very, Martin Harris believed that he was talking to Christ. He had this very magical worldview, and so did the Whitmers. Anyway, this is just
when you say Martin Harris believed he was talking to Christ, he believed he was talking to Christ in the form of what, Julia? Because
a deer.
That distinguishing factor is what makes
I should have mentioned that.
More difficult to believe. But I have the same thought of this stone box that they purport to find, through some unseen power slid back into the hill. There are obvious reference to that in the Book of Mormon, which we'll get to in just a minute. I don't believe there's any such account in the Bible. You're right, Julia. I think regardless of where exactly it comes from, what it helps inform you of is the context of these people's worldview when they're making these claims. It helps you understand this is the kind of guy that Martin Harris was. We know that he was a religious seeker, that he pivoted between different sects, that after his time in Mormonism, he was also involved with the Strangites and Strang's plates, right? And so he just is someone who kind of saw miracles everywhere he went, which isn't to say that he didn't see the miraculous Mormon things he claimed. It just helps you understand the context in which he's making those claims.
I think it goes back to something you said, Colby, about how Joseph Smith's tripping over ancient artifacts left, right, and center. Similarly, I think Martin Harris bought into that idea that, okay, well, if Joseph found some gold plates in this hill, there's probably some more around. Let's go look for them. But he gives the excuses, and I'll use the term excuses there, that Joseph used in his treasure digging, which was he would go out on a dig. He was the glass looker. He would say, oh, yeah, it's here. Oh, no, the spirits took it away, but that'll be however many dollars, please. And he would still get paid. And this idea that unseen spirits can withdraw treasure back into a hill is a concept that those around Joseph Smith were very familiar with. And so that would be the reason they would give as to why we couldn't get our stone box. But that's not the reason being given for why the original stone box isn't there. We don't yet have a good reason for why that's not in the Hill Cumorah still.
Yeah.
This other box has been taken away by an unseen power, but I've not yet seen an explanation as to why the original cement box that lasted over 1,000 years is no longer around.
Yeah.
Right. And one thing I wanted to note as we look at this next account is you can see that Martin Harris is talking about there were 3 people involved in finding that account or in finding that box. So there's actually basically a second witness that we'll talk about here in just a moment. But yeah, I did have this kind of sarcastic slide here just to say, sometime that box will be found and you will find one corner of the lid broken and know that I have spoken the truth. As far as I know, even though archaeologists have looked over the Hill Cumorah, it is an archaeologically clean site. And this, this magic disappearing box has never been found. So, Martin Harris is bearing testimony that you will know what he's talking about is true based on this fact that he puts at issue. And this fact has never been revealed in a way that vindicates Martin Harris. Instead, it's the exact opposite.
People will say, this isn't a prophecy. He's not authorized to prophesy. He's just Martin Harris. But he is making a prediction about what will happen in the future. And he is a man of significant spiritual standing within the church. So, it still matters that he got this wrong.
And all of this stuff is contextual information. It helps you analyze how to think about these claims that are being made.
Yeah.
So let's go to our next account. So this one comes straight from Brigham Young, but the person involved is Porter Rockwell. So this comes from the Journal of Discourses, Volume 19, 1878. He's talking about these miraculous claims and how you can find evidence for the Nephites all over the place. So he says, sometimes I take the liberty of talking a little further with regard to such things. Orrin Porter Rockwell is an eyewitness to some powers of removing the treasures of the earth. He was with certain parties that lived nearby where the plates were found that contain the records of the Book of Mormon. There were a great many treasures hid up by the Nephites. Porter was with them one night where there were treasures, and they could find them easy enough, but they could not obtain them. I will tell you a story which will be marvelous to most of you. It was told me by Porter, whom I would believe just as quickly as any man that lives. When he tells a thing he understands, he will tell it just as he knows it. He is a man that does not lie. He said that on this night, when they were engaged hunting for this old treasure, they dug around the end of a chest for some 20 inches. The chest was about 3 feet square. One man who was determined to have the contents of that chest took his pick and struck into the lid of it and split through the chest. The blow took off a piece of the lid, which a certain lady kept in her possession until she died. That chest of money went into the bank, and by bank here it means like the ditch bank or the bank of earth. Porter describes it so, making a rumbling sound. He says this is just as true as the heavens are. I have heard others tell the same story. I relate this because it is marvelous to you, but to those who understand these things, it is not marvelous. And so the significance to me here is we know that Martin Harris says in his account that there were other people involved in this same treasure dig. We're talking about the same area. Where the accounts are very similar, right? They glance off of this, the top of the box, they chip it away, and there's some piece that's broken off. Porter's account then, or I guess Brigham's account through Porter, makes it even more interesting because there's a certain lady that keeps this like broken stone, I guess, in her possession, it says, until she died. Your thoughts about this one? Does it seem like a second account of the same events? Because to me, it does.
Yeah.
But like a reiterating of this one.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like to me. Yeah, again, the old lady keeping it, like, again, we were talking about like the church, they like to hold on to things, or people back in that time, they would hold on to these artifacts. And just like this woman is doing, why did no one keep any part, or why do we not know where the stone box is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There are certain things that the church has kept and denied having kept, but we knew kept all along, like one of Joseph Smith's seer stones that they said they didn't have, and then they did. So, certain artifacts have been kept from this time, and, they've kept, and apparently some old lady has kept a part of this miraculous box that just disappears. But yeah, the question is then, if these sorts of artifacts can be kept and are important, because here it's being pointed to as, evidence that this thing existed. I guess what I'm kind of trying to get at is evidence sort of matters or it doesn't. Not to create a false binary, but if you're going to say that physical, tangible evidence of the Book of Mormon matters, then why don't we have the gold plates? Then why don't we have these other things?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, literally, why don't we have anything? There is no archaeological evidence in the New World for the Book of Mormon, period. There is
even
nothing.
If you try and go to Cumorah theory, there's still nothing.
Exactly. And I think the other thing that's really interesting is, again, just like the context of these statements. Like, these guys believed in treasure trunks that sink down into the earth. That is not, in my worldview, that is not the way that the world works. And I think that's, again, to your point, Nemo, like evidence either matters or it doesn't. I think it also goes to this question of like, were these naturalistic artifacts or are these like spiritual artifacts that have some magic subjective experience inherently linked to encountering them? It's like mixed on that, right? Like it's a literal chest of treasure that they say that they find, and they literally try and strike it and break off this piece that this woman keeps for the rest of her life. And yet it operates like a magical artifact sinking down into the earth. that doesn't really reflect the world I think that we see, but what it does reflect to me is the world of the Book of Mormon, because the Book of Mormon very specifically talks about this. And thus, in my view, when we go back to this idea of the expectation of religious experience, how expectation can help create those spiritual experiences, these people already had primed in them, because of their encounter with the Book of Mormon, to believe in these sinking treasures. Now, we know for like Joseph Smith and some of the treasure digging folks, they would have had this before their encounter with the Book of Mormon, but then it can operate exactly reverse too, right? They found the Book of Mormon's claims more believable because it talked about a reality that they already believed in. They believed in sinking treasure. And so they would have found the Book of Mormon more believable because it also incorporates sinking treasure into its narrative.
It offers a plausible explanation as to where Joseph may have got the ideas that he then put into the Book of Mormon, if that's the way you want to read it. But like you said, also for readers of the Book of Mormon in that time, that's more plausible to them because of what was going on around them. And then if they're presented with stories, it makes those stories more plausible also.
Right.
I wanted to say, like, when the church, this reminds me of when the church first published the images of Joseph Smith's brown seer stone. I think it was when I was newly married. I think it was 2014, 15. I
15,
remember.
I think.
Okay, yeah. I just remember feeling kind of shocked. I was like, oh, they have this stone and, there's 15 prophets, seers, and revelators, and they haven't used it. But Joseph Smith says that this stone has power, or that through him as a prophet has power, but it's not functioning that way now, even though it's still in the hands of prophets. It was just like, because I don't have that worldview at all, that these rocks can show things, but Joseph Smith and Martin and David Whitmer, they did. And so this wasn't shocking at all to them. Whereas like us learning about that later can feel very differently because it's not our worldview.
Yep. Absolutely. But it is the worldview of the Book of Mormon. So here I've got directly from the Book of Helaman, chapter 13. Nemo, who does that adorable claymation figure look like to you from your time inside of Mormonism?
It looks like Samuel the Lamanite.
That's because it is. So Samuel the Lamanite prophesies shortly before Christ enters the narrative or is born in Jerusalem during the Book of Mormon's narrative. And he's prophesying about this great curse that is going to come on the land. Julia, would you read this?
Before Julia reads it, you could argue that he prophesies before Christ, shortly after Christ enters the narrative because of the way the Book of Mormon was written. I think this is an opportunity to, again, just remind people of the way the Book of Mormon was written, that this is around the time we're actually starting to get some more specific ideas of when Christ's going to turn up. Before this point, everyone's going, yeah, I don't know when he's going to turn up. Just some point soon. And then, Christ enters the Book of Mormon narrative here with a bit of a bang and with some incredible specificity.
Yeah, if I can speak to that a little bit more, just for people who might not be aware. So you covered the loss of the 116 pages earlier in the LDS Discussion series with Mike. And when those lost 116 pages, which began at the beginning of the Book of Mormon's narrative, the Book of Lehi, are lost, Joseph Smith and Oliver don't continue they do continue. They don't restart. Yeah. They begin basically with the Book of Mosiah. This is building off the work of Brent Metcalf, and it's called Mosiah Priority because it means that they started with Mosiah and then they wrap back around to the beginning of the book. So that's why the Book of Mormon has prophecies that are like pinpointed to when Christ is going to appear in the narrative. Like Nephi and Lehi know that he's going to come about 600 years after that. But if you actually look from Mosiah tell about Helaman, you're right, Nemo. Yeah. No one knows when Christ is going to come, just that he will come someday. So specifically, like King Benjamin has a prophecy about Christ, receives his name. That's he has no idea when he's going to enter the narrative. It's only basically right before 3rd Nephi that we see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So with that context,
carry on, Julia.
That's okay.
Yeah. So this is from Helaman 13. And behold, the time cometh that he curseth your riches, that they become slippery, that ye cannot hold them. And in the days of your poverty, ye cannot retain them. Yea, in that day ye shall say, Oh, that we had remembered the Lord our God in the day that he gave us our riches. And then they would not have become slippery, that we should lose them. For behold, our riches are gone from us. Behold, we lay a tool here, and on the morrow it is gone. And behold, our swords are taken from us in the day that we have sought them for battle. Yea, we have hid up our treasures, and they have slipped away from us because of the curse of the land. Oh, that we had repented in the day that the word of the Lord came unto us. For behold, the land is cursed, and all things are become slippery, and we cannot hold them. Yeah.
Sounds a lot like some of Joseph Smith's early excursions, where there's a curse upon this treasure that we're trying to find, and so it's been taken away by the spirits that guard it. Yeah.
It's also very repetitive. I feel like he says kind of the same things just again and again.
Which is a hallmark of the Book of Mormon. And as we've spoken about in earlier LDS Discussions episodes, seems to point to its origins as an orally dictated text.
Right.
That's being kind of created as it goes. Because if this were being certainly abridged to be engraved on very difficult to engrave metal plates that have to be made very thin, a very resource intensive process, no matter what way you think it might have happened. It takes time to engrave those sorts of things. You would not be using this kind of redundant language. Or even if this kind of redundant language was written by the first people that wrote it, you wouldn't allow it to continue in an abridgment. You would condense, you would simplify.
Yeah, particularly that abridgment piece, I think, is where this repetitiveness is really difficult to buy in the narrative, because Mormon or Moroni, whichever is handling this particular section, is supposed to be focusing this narrative. And yet there's so many times where you could see clear evidence of the oral dictation just in the way it reads. It doesn't make any sense for like corrections.
So many which is to says that go back and change what was said. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, corrections or changes in the stream of consciousness that seem to indicate someone's orally dictating them versus like sitting down, abridging, and thinking, okay, now how do I want to summarize this, right? A summary is going to look different than stream of consciousness. The Book of Mormon tends to look almost exclusively like stream of consciousness, not as an actual summary.
Yeah, even unto the third, and then unto the fourth, and then unto the fifth. Like you would just say several generations passed away.
Yeah.
You know, anyway.
Yeah.
And this isn't the only reference to this kind of worldview in the Book of Mormon. I'll go ahead and read this one in Mormon chapter 1. This is where the curse then continues. Mormon says, "But I did remain among them, but I was forbidden to preach unto them because of the hardness of their hearts, and because of the hardness of the hearts, because of the hardness of their hearts, the land was cursed for their sake. And these Gadianton robbers who were among the Lamanites did infest the land, insomuch that the inhabitants thereof began to hide up their treasures in the earth. And they became slippery because the Lord had cursed the land, that they could not hold them nor retain them again. And it came to pass that there were sorceries and witchcrafts and magic, and the power of the evil one was wrought upon all the face of the land, even unto the fulfilling of all the words of Abinadi and also Samuel the Lamanite," which we just read. I think not only does this help tell us about the worldview that these early church history figures would have had, right, believing in this like literal slippery treasure idea, but it also helps tell us why they were looking for lost Nephite treasure, which Brigham Young's account says, right? Like there were buried Nephite treasures all over the place. Well, this is why they believed that, because it says it right in the Book of Mormon.
This also reminds me of Joseph's, his connection with the Captain Kidd treasure, and that they were trying to look for that as well, and then it was slipping away, or they couldn't find
Joseph's penchant for buried Spanish silver and the treasure of people like Captain Kidd. It also, if you take a really cynical view, so I'll caveat it with that and saying, this is a particularly cynical take, but you could view this as almost Joseph starting to excuse the lack of physical evidence for what he was claiming already by saying, things like treasures, like the gold plates, tend to go missing. God can say that they're gone or that they're taken away or these sorts of things. So yeah, a cynical view.
Particularly this phrase that the power of the evil one was wrought upon all of the face of the land. That basically gives you a pre-built apologetic for literally any naturalistic thing that should exist if the Book of Mormon were true and historical, not existing today. Well, why? It's because this power of the evil one, it was wrought upon the face of the whole land, right? It can basically excuse anything not being there. It's a good point.
Yeah.
Is he saying the evil one is the one burying the treasure? Or
I think more just like the power of the evil one is unleashed because of this curse. And so it can do whatever it wants, really. Now we know why there's no Yeah, now we know why there's. If only it had mentioned the power of the evil one was wrought upon the people's DNA, then we would have a clear explanation for why we see no DNA evidence for the Book of Mormon.
And he did place a curse upon their chromosomes.
Yeah, even until the 22nd and 23rd.
Okay, so this next
that would have been great historical evidence for the Book of Mormon. If Joseph Smith had talked about chromosomes, I would have been like, okay, the man's a prophet for sure, definitely, no question. If he beat them to the discovery of DNA, incredible.
Well,
go ahead.
He does talk about the skin of blackness, which I mean, it's not quite the same, but based on wickedness and then righteousness, you turn white. Anyway, so that's a foolproof test.
I was going to say God's foreknowledge in the Book of Mormon, as you both know, basically extends right up until about the time it was written for some reason, and then it doesn't go any further than that.
That tends to happen, I think, with a lot of scriptures.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah.
Sorry. Let's carry on.
So this next section is, so in this last episode, we talked about where did Joseph Smith get his ideas of the golden plates? And then we have a timeline talking about these different sources where he could have gotten the idea, or if we just are aware that other people around him are talking about this. So this is the source.
Yeah, if I can pause you right there, because I think this is one where apologists often confuse what we're saying here. So I want to be really clear. We are not directly saying Joseph Smith got these ideas or plagiarized these ideas directly from any of these sources. What we are saying is that if you look at contemporary sources to Joseph Smith, in many of these instances, apologists claim these things could have only come to Joseph Smith through God, through divine revelation. And if that is true, this comes back to the special pleading problem we talked about, half an hour ago. If that is true, you then have to apply that same logic to these other individuals who are not claiming any type of divine revelation, but are purporting these same ideas, right? They're offering these same ideas and talking about this similar idea of ancient records being held in a stone box. So again, it's not a direct causation claim. Here's exactly where Joseph Smith got the idea and we know it. It's just showing the context of how regular some of these claims were in Joseph Smith's milieu.
Yeah, it's not novel.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, so going back, there's one source that was given by, so a lot of this comes from Dan Vogel's book, Indian Origins in the Book of Mormon. I think is what it's called. So he pulled out Spalding, and then I've cited Spalding here, where this is one of the sources where Joseph Smith could have found this idea, or it was around Joseph Smith at the time of talking about the stone box. Do one of you, Nemo, do you want to read this one?
Sure. Written before his death in 1816, Solomon Spalding wrote a book called Manuscript Found, which was a fanciful romance of ancient America, in which it is pretended to be a translation of an ancient record. As I was walking and forming various conjectures respecting the character, situation, and numbers of those people who far exceeded the present Indians in the works of art and ingenuity, I happened to tread on a flat stone. This was at a small distance from the fort, and it lay on top of a great small mound of earth exactly horizontal. The face of it had singular appearance. I discovered a number of characters which appeared to me to be letters, but so much effaced by the ravages of time that I could not read the inscription. With the assistance of a lever, I raised the stone. The man finds a man-made cave with an earthen box with a cover. The box was 2 feet in length and 1.5 in breadth, and 1 3 inches in diameter. My mind filled with the awful sensations which crowded fast upon me would hardly permit my hands to remove this venerable deposit, but curiosity soon gained the ascendancy, and the box was taken and raised to open it. When I had removed the cover, I found that it contained 28 rolls of parchment, and that when appeared to be manuscripts written in elegant hand with Roman letters and in the Latin language. They were written on a variety of subjects, but the roll which principally attracted my attention contained a history of the author's life and that part of America which extends along the Great Lakes and the waters of the Mississippi.
Thank you. So in Manuscript Found, he's discussing the people that exceed the present Indians. There's a flat stone, a mound. He uses a lever to get it open. Here, though, it talks about he finds parchments, not any kind of metal plate, which we've discussed before. These codices are anachronistic. They would not have been around during the gold plates creation or the brass plates creation. Yeah. It's very similar to the Book of Mormon. While I have read manuscript found, I don't think it's any kind of plagiarism at all. It is very similar in a lot of ways. But that's also, like Colby was saying, these are just things that people were talking about in general. Not that Joseph Smith had to have read this book. It was just what was being talked about.
Right. It's definitely an interesting one.
Yeah.
Well, I think it contains loads of parallels, again, to the description of the box as purported by Joseph Smith.
Yeah. The flat stone.
The flat stone, the way it's on top of a small mound of earth. He used a lever to raise the stone. And then yes, it was parchment inside, but it was still an ancient record.
Yeah.
Right.
And of a specific part of America, which, unless you're desperately clinging to try and find some sort of archaeological evidence for the Book of Mormon, is what Joseph Smith believed to be the extent of the realms of the Book of Mormon.
Yeah. And so from the book, The Indian Origins in the Book of Mormon, Dan Vogel has this great quote where he says, Joseph Smith was certainly not the first to claim the discovery of a stone box, metal plates, or an Indian book. According to various accounts, some of the North American mounds also contained metal plates. Plates constructed by the Indians were usually made of hammered copper or silver and were sometimes etched. Given the currency of such stories, Joseph Smith's own claim that he found a stone box, metal plates, and an Indian record in the hill near his father's farm certainly would have seemed credible to his money-digging friends as well as to others of his contemporaries. And another thing I was thinking is, Dan Vogel is very specific on the types of materials. They use copper and silver. And we've talked about this before when we laid out the timeline. I don't think, if my memory is correct, I don't think any of those plates were made out of gold. So again, this is like this grandeur that Joseph Smith is coming up with, where he's like, oh, this is one of the first, if not the only record that I've seen of gold plates being found, which I just think that's interesting. But again, these are credible to those that were around him. And very believable to them.
Right.
And that is, we often get accused of presentism. It's, again, worth hammering home that at the time of Joseph Smith, a lot of this stuff that the apologists are now having to defend because people roll their eyes now, people wouldn't have rolled their eyes then.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the question we've been talking about this whole time, is what happened to the stone box? And so there are a few sources that talk about the outcome or what happened to it. Some of these come from David Whitmer, and one of them was from August of 1875. Colby, do you mind talking about this one?
Not at all. In the Chicago Times, published in August of 1875, David Whitmer was interviewed. In it, he explains what happened to the stone box in which the plates were kept for over 1,000 years. 3 times has he, David, been at the Hill Cumorah and seen the casket that contained the tablets and the seer stone. Eventually, the casket had been washed down to the foot of the hill, but it was to be seen when he last visited the historic place.
Don't you just hate it when your ancient stone box just gets washed down to the bottom of the hill?
The thing that's interesting, though, is it says it's washed down to the bottom of the hill, but he could still tell that it was that stone box because he says, but it was to be seen when he last visited that historic place, which to me suggests he was able to say, like, oh, yeah, there's the stone box right there. At least that's the way it's phrased to me. He's not saying it was destroyed or, to your point, Nemo, that it sunk down into the earth. He's saying it was still to be seen when he last visited that site, which is interesting.
Don't you think if there were these, because we've talked about it's these 4 upright stones with a stone at the bottom and a stone lid, and they've been washed down this hill. So cool, they've crumbled apart. But the stones won't have disappeared. The box has lost its integrity. It's been around for 1,000 years. It's getting tired. And it's washed down to the bottom of this hill. Do you not think the church wouldn't have around it a fence, a plaque, spotlights even, saying, look, here's the remnants of the stone box in which the prophet Joseph Smith found the gold plates. Come and look at it. Come and take a peek. Here it is, washed at the bottom of the hill, all jaggedy and angles. Yes, it looks like just some large stones stuck up out of the ground, but this once formed the box further up the hill. It was. Where's that? Where is that even? That would be something, but it's not even there.
Mm-hmm.
I just
Also,
don't even understand how that would happen physically.
That's what I was just about to say.
That
Yeah,
to one
how
side.
would it? Yeah, how
Right.
would it have even washed down the hill?
The only thing that makes sense is
Because-
if they unearth the whole thing, right? And it was like
Exactly.
a boat
Or
down.
the erosion of the earth around it.
Because it would
So
just
the
be
earth
a
around it
pool.
eroded, so that then it, because the earth on the front side of it is on the side of a hill, so that earth would have to disappear, and then there would have to be it was essentially some sort of landslip, right?
Right. But then, set the rocks aside for a second. Why did nobody hang on to a piece of this cement or one of these pillars? Like
Mhm.
just something, just the idea that there would have been something tangible. Like there was something tangible, supposedly, according to Martin Harrison and Porter Rockwell, of this completely separate stone box that they found, right? That they chipped off, and Martin promised that one day it would be found, that box, and you'd have that piece missing and everyone would know he was telling the truth. Well, that never happened. But why were they so concerned with having this little old lady hang on to that rock for the rest of her life? That's literally what it says. But no one thought to like, hey, I'm going to grab one of those stones from Joseph Smith's stone box and use it to build the mantle over my fireplace, or I'm going to hang on to it, or we're going to put it at the foot of City Hall. Just something important that would have warranted hanging on to that. It just is so odd that these early saints did that for basically every other thing that Joseph Smith touched. Like there are accounts that someone held on to the arrowhead that Joseph Smith found at the Zelf mound. And yet we don't have anything tangible that would help vindicate Joseph Smith's claims of existing in reality.
And the tangible things we do have, like the Kinderhook plates, for example, that were then found, once tested, discovered to be a fraud.
Mhm.
And the papyri, similarly, we still have them. I mean, this is often, with just really quickly, the Book of Abraham papyri, this is often a sort of straw man that's then attacked. It's the idea that, we don't have all the papyri, whatever. It ultimately comes down to what Joseph Smith printed as vignettes. Just don't say what he says that they say. It really is as simple as that. But even then, we have the original papyrus that we can look at. We have what it should have looked like. We know what it ought to have been, and it isn't what Joseph claimed it was. Kinderhook plates, we have them. We've tested them. We know that what Joseph Smith thought they were. The Mark Hoffman forgeries.
Yeah.
We realize they're forgeries, right? So whenever we do get hold of the original's ancient item, or even non-ancient item sometimes, but historical item, it doesn't always help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Julia.
I was just going to say, like, he says that, hang on, where was the part? Oh, the last time he visited the place, because Joseph Smith, I guess, got the plates in 28, and this is 75. So it's like almost 50-ish years later or so. It'd just be interesting to see when the last time he was in Cumorah. I don't know. That probably wouldn't change very much because it's now 2026, but...
Yeah, the other thing I was struck by, Nemo, when you were talking about the Book of Abraham, is even set aside the vignettes, set aside questions about the papyrus. At a fundamental level, Joseph Smith does not understand how Egyptian functioned as a language. And we'll talk about that in our next LDS Discussions episode when we talk about the information density claims that are being made in the Book of Mormon. But my point is, and this comes back to something you said earlier, like about these apologetic resources that are pointing to what was actually in the stone box, and they're incorrect on a very basic level. Joseph Smith was like incorrect on every level about the way that Egyptian worked. Like it really is as simple as that. He thought it worked completely different from the way that it does. And maybe brief spoiler for that next episode, the conclusion of that next episode, but that misunderstanding that Joseph Smith has demonstrated to have through his work on the Kirtland Egyptian material involving those papyrus is the exact misunderstanding of the way that Egyptian worked that we find in the text of the Book of Mormon itself when it's talking about the information density of Egyptian relative to Hebrew.
Yeah, I'm excited for that episode. So this next one is also David Whitmer. This is from August 16th of 1878. So this one, 75. So just 3 years later, right? So yeah, just one of you. I can't remember who read the last one.
I'll read this one.
Okay, perfect.
So this comes from August 16th, 1878 from the Deseret Evening News. And he's interviewed. So it's kind of question and answer format. So he's asked, where is that cave? And he answers, in the state of New York. And the person says, in the Hill Cumorah? And then David Whitmer replies, no, but not far away from that place. I saw the place where the plates were found, and a great many did so. And it awakened an excitement at that time because the worst enemies of Mormonism stirred up the confusion by telling about the plates which Joseph found and the gold Bible which he was in possession of. So he was in constant danger of being robbed and killed. He's then asked, how did the place look? And he answers, it was a stone box, and the stones looked to me as if they were cemented together. That was on the side of the hill and a little down from the top.
So again, what I'm getting from this is he's saying there was a lot of excitement because the worst enemies of Mormonism were stirring up against Joseph. Like he didn't find the plates aren't real. I feel like that would be the best time to be like, oh, look, here's a stone box. Like here, look, I've took a piece of it, or I don't know. I feel like that's would encourage them to preserve that in some way because it is a type of evidence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to say something that's just come to mind is the idea of when the Berlin Wall came down, they had these people that they called the woodpeckers who would go and take pieces of it. And I think you can buy more and less legitimate pieces of the Berlin Wall as souvenirs, right, in Berlin now. So the idea that, this woman took a little piece with her of a different stone box, but no one took any of the original, even when it washed down the hill and was broken into bits, apparently. And if a great many people saw the place, maybe there's reverence for it as a sacred site, perhaps, but people by and large do like to try and take souvenirs. So it's just, again, curious, like you said, that no one took any.
Yeah, very similarly, when I traveled to China shortly after high school, we went and climbed the Great Wall, and like there's signs everywhere, and you're told going into it that you cannot take any piece of the Great Wall because obviously people are going to want to, right? Mm-hmm. It's millennia old. It can be seen from outer space, like just this amazing accomplishment of human ingenuity and barbarity, I would say, if you know a little bit about how it was built. But yeah, same type of thing, because people, when you're connected to a physical artifact that has that level of significance, like human brains immediately want to be like, I want a piece of this. That's what we do, right? And the other thing that's very interesting to me about this quote in particular is we get an additional account this time about the box involving this cement and the cement being at the corners. So it lines up with these other accounts. But the other thing that's interesting is it talks about how many people went and visited this, right? I saw the place where the plates were found, and a great many did so. As far as we know, I've never seen anyone, like in journal accounts or whatever, talk about going up to this place and seeing this place aside from this account right here.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah. This also reminds me of, and I don't have the sources in front of me, but this is what I've heard, that there's here in Missouri in Adamant-Diamond, Joseph Smith claims, I think, and I don't have the sources again, but I'll be happy to be wrong, but that Joseph Smith says that he found the altar of Adam and Eve, because he says that they originated from Jackson County, Missouri. And I think he told that to the people, and I think he may have even encouraged people to take some of this altar. I don't know if that's correct, but that's what we'd heard whenever we went and visited on a youth trip, which is, again, this is like supposedly ancient things, and then people are trying to.
And can you go see the altar?
I think there's just a pile of rocks there, but I'd also heard a joke where people would come and they would just dump rocks for the youth to take. So I don't know exactly, but I'll have to find the sources to see if Joseph, because I know that he says that Adam and Eve were originally from there, but I thought he said that he found the altar of Adam.
Right.
Right. That's what I remember also.
Yeah, I remember.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that's what rings true to me.
Okay, anyway, so these
and I'm from the land of Stonehenge, so I'm thinking, well, we have 5,000-year-old religious structures here,
right?
That are very well seen and kept and preserved, and we can date. So it's always been a little bit suspicious to me when Joseph Smith claimed to find these ancient structures.
Yeah. Okay, so the first one was 75, 78, and then this next one is also from David Whitmer, but it's from 1881, and I'll read this one.
David Whitmer's saying a lot.
He is. So he says those two things, but however, in an interview with the Chicago Times again, a few years later on October 14th of 1881, David Whitmer implies that he was told where Joseph Smith found the plates. On Mr. Whitmer's part with Joseph Smith and he was loath to believe in their actuality, notwithstanding the community in which he lived, Ontario County, New York, was alive with excitement in regard to Smith's finding a great treasure. And they informed him that they knew that Smith had the plates, as they had seen the place that he had taken them from, on the Hill Cumorah, about 2 miles from Palmyra. So to me, the wording here kind of distances himself from these events where they said that they saw it. They said that they saw the place where it was in the hill. And I don't know why David Whitmer wouldn't just say that he saw it. But I guess this is third person from the interviewer from the Chicago Times, the Mr. Whitmer's part.
It does seem like an odd inconsistency to just 3 years before this say, I have seen that place and many other people have too, and then to make no mention of that. I'm sure you could probably reconcile these together because it's not like he explicitly says he didn't see it, but you're right that the way it's phrased is very odd if just 3 years before he's claiming, I've been up there and many other people have too.
Yeah, it just like the community that's what I feel like those pronouns mean is when they say they. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it just sort of sounds, and I think Dan Vogel had the same opinion from this source from Mormon Documents Volume 5. It just seems like he's distancing himself from maybe he didn't actually see. But anyway, I just thought those were interesting. So this next one is I think probably one of the most interesting sources that we have. This is from Lorenzo Saunders. Colby, do you want to read this one?
I do. In an interview with Thomas Gregg and Lorenzo Saunders in 1885, we read, the time he claimed to have taken the plates from the hill was on the 22nd day of September in 1827. And I went on the next Sunday following with 5 or 6 other ones, and we hunted the side hill by course, and we could find no place where the ground had been broke. There was a large hole where the money diggers had dug a year or two before, but no fresh dirt. There never was such a hole. There never was any plates taken out of that hill, nor any other hill in that county. Was in Wayne County. It is all a lie. No, sir, I never saw the plates, nor no one else.
Yeah, so what are your guys' thoughts on that one?
I mean, my immediate thought is that we know that Joseph Smith and his father were part of this money digging company. So they would form these mining companies that would, kind of band together and need some financier to then allow them to do this dig. So we know that this aligns with this other story that the money diggers that Joseph Smith was involved in before his involvement with the plates thought that they were entitled to a share of the money value of the plates because they were viewing it as, we're in this mining company with you and you found this treasure, and so we're entitled to part of it. That part then hooks into this account, talking about the 5 or 6 other ones going and hunting on the hill for these additional treasures. So it makes sense to me from that point of view. It also makes sense that, I mean, the day lines up, but of course people would have probably known the day in 1885 when he's talking about, and by day I mean the 22nd of September, right? That autumnal, is that how you say autumnal equinox?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Correct. Thank you for using autumn.
Yeah, so it's interesting that they go there and at least their account is that there was no fresh dirt. I don't really know what purpose they would have to lie about this, because that's going to be the natural apologetic response is well, these are just anti-Mormons that were mad and so they're lying about Joseph Smith. But what reason would they have to lie about him not finding what he said he had found? Their interest is in him finding what he said he had found so that they have some claim against him for money. So it doesn't really... What's that?
I was going to say, in fact, so much of what motivated Joseph Smith's sneakiness around these gold plates was justified by the idea that these men might try and come and take it from him.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's exactly what their interest is too. Mm-hmm. So if they're going to exaggerate, my mind is they would exaggerate on the side of Joseph Smith having actually found something so that they have some claim against him, because that's what their interest is. It doesn't make any sense that they would lie and say that he never found anything and that there was no disturbed dirt. So
they'd be saying he's a sneaky little so-and-so who owes me money.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is a late source, but it is interesting that he also says, he's talking about the day I went on the next Sunday following the 5 or 6 others. And he says we couldn't find anything.
I mean, what you could say, what you can always say is that, well, the hole was filled back in or the box had already disappeared. It was already gone by that point. and the hill was made clean. And at that point, if you believe in a trickster God who is just hiding these things and is able to manipulate the stuff, then that kind of special pleading can't really be argued with.
Well, this is an opposition of these other accounts from David Whitmer, right? Where many others saw it, where he says, we went up the next Sunday. So I don't know.
So David Whitmer's not telling the truth when he says the box is still around, if the way to get around what Lorenzo Saunders is saying is that the box was taken away already.
Yeah. So
ways.
Yeah. So another slide that I wanted to show was there's this image from the L. Tom Perry Special Collections at BYU. And it's all it says is description, a man is standing profile on a hillside. But on the image itself, it says it's in pen where plates were found, Hill Cumorah. And so like there's a man standing there, it's black and white image, and you can see this little indent in the earth. It kind of looks like a little dimple. And he's just standing there. There's obviously no stone box that I can see or stones of any kind, but
it's also no trees, which is interesting because I believe in all the depictions we've seen so far, it's a wooded area. And my understanding has always been that the plates were buried in the side of a hill in a wooded area. And this is not just an archaeologically clean hill, it's a hill clean of any sort of foliage.
It would be interesting to go to the Hill Cumorah and kind of see where that picture was taken. And also, are they just taking it because of the indent in the earth? And they're like, oh, this must be where this hole, because it's the only place where a hole even was. It would just be interesting to search.
Yeah, I mean, that's not a gotcha by any means. It's just struck me that for the first time that actually what we're seeing there is a very bare hillside or a grassy hillside, whereas I always thought it was wooded.
Yeah, the story of Joseph Smith going to obtain the plates when he goes and he's riding the dark horse with Emma in the middle of the night. To me, if this is the way the hill looked when Joseph Smith did that, it kind of prompts the question, how did Joseph keep Emma from seeing this box? Or, you know what I'm saying? It's just how exactly mechanically did that work?
Does this present some sort of false summit?
Yeah, possibly.
That he's hidden behind if she's at the bottom of the hill? Or?
Yeah. It's a lot easier to understand, like, if he goes into a grove of trees to find wherever the box is, and then she's just outside that grove of trees. Why she couldn't go also doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. But then two interesting points there is that one, all the important things in Mormonism happen in groves of trees. So maybe that, again, maybe the Hill Cumorah is plain like this, but the church depicts it as happening in woods because the first vision happened in some woods. And again, you're kind of building up that sort of sacred imagery around that idea.
But he hides it. He's running from all those characters, and he's like dodging them, and then he hides it in a tree.
Well, yeah, where's the log?
I'm just confused because, like, I've been to the Hill Cumorah, and they have cleared out a spot, which I thought they did on purpose, for the Cumorah pageants. But like there are trees there. I'm just curious about this image of why they think this is where the plates were found.
Yeah, I mean, and granted, maybe the opposite field of view. There are a lot of trees, and we just don't know. But like, at least from what we're seeing, you can like that other hill that's off in the distance. That's like miles away, and you could see anybody from miles away. I mean, you can see this little copse of trees or something like right here to the left, like basically directly from the man's field of view. He's like looking at that little set of trees. But aside from that, where exactly is this like, flight that Joseph Smith has from these bad guys? Where is this even happening? This is like, there's like, you could see someone from where that guy's standing for like miles from, at least from what we can see in this picture.
Yeah. So we've talked about before with the clean hill, and I just wanted to put this in there just to really emphasize the Hill Cumorah being a clean hill. Nemo, would you like to read this one?
Yeah, sure. So John E. Clark earned his BS and MA in archaeology from Brigham Young University and his PhD in anthropology from the University of Michigan in 1994. He is currently a professor in the Department of Anthropology at BYU, where for many years he directed BYU's New World Archaeological Foundation. So this guy, as we talk about bias in academic studies and things like that, the university that this guy works for and that he received a lot of his training from is probably, you could say, institutionally invested in the results of whatever study he does around the authenticity of the Book of Mormon, showing that the Book of Mormon is authentic. There is certainly an interest in the institution he works for that to be the case. So here's what he had to say. In accord with these general observations about New York and Pennsylvania, we come to our principal object, the Hill Cumorah. Archaeologically speaking, it is a clean hill. No artifacts, no walls, no trenches, no arrowheads. The area immediately surrounding the hill is similarly clean. Pre-Columbian people did not settle or build here. This is not the place of Mormon's last stand. We must look elsewhere for that hill. Now, the problem in looking elsewhere is Joseph Smith and his contemporaries very much believed that that hill was the place of that last stand. And so you can't just go looking elsewhere for it, because the narrative of the founder of the religion and all his contemporaries was that that is the place. So you can't just look elsewhere for it. You actually have to address the fact that it's archaeologically clean, to my mind. Your thoughts?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, then it just becomes a question of consistency, because Joseph Smith very much, as you just said, Joseph Smith and his contemporaries very much believed that this was the Hill Cumorah, where both the final battle for the Jaredites and the Nephites happened. So if the numbers in the Book of Mormon are to be believed, we are talking about millions of dead people in this valley, which, number one, doesn't make any sense. There just isn't enough space or resources there, as far as I know, to even support a battle of that size. The numbers recorded in the Book of Ether's battle, like the Jaredites battle, would literally be like the largest battle in the ancient world by significant magnitudes when I've looked at this before. There are so many logistics that go into like these historicity questions. That may be a fun thing to do in a future episode, to talk about the actual logistics of like supporting a fighting force of 2.5 million people, or whatever amount of dead is recorded in the Book of Ether. But my point is that they want to basically say we must look elsewhere for that hill. Like, why? Joseph Smith thought that it was here. Joseph Smith said that it was here. Why would we look elsewhere? Why would we not just take Joseph Smith's word and then test whether Joseph Smith's claims about what he said align with what we see? What this professor is saying, Professor Clark, is very clearly it doesn't. But because of his faith commitment, he needs to then find somewhere else to find Hill Cumorah, which is just an interesting epistemological problem, I think.
That last line could very well read, we must therefore shift the goalposts so that we can then find something to match up with our need for this to be religiously viable. If we're looking at the amount of casualties or dead at the battle that should have taken place here in upstate New York, we're looking at the same amounts roughly as the Battle of Stalingrad, which is one of the largest battles ever fought.
With modern weaponry, not with
with
ancient weaponry.
Yeah.
Right.
Put that into context for you.
Right. The other thing I'm just struck by is it's just so odd that apologists are willing to believe Joseph Smith's claims about things that can never be demonstrated. So things like claims about the afterlife, about the nature of God, things that we really can't determine fully, right? There's never going to be conclusive evidence of Joseph Smith was right, that God and Jesus are separate people, just as an example. So they are willing to take Joseph Smith's word for claims that can never be falsified or even tested. But when we do have a claim that Joseph Smith made, presumably using the same revelatory process, and it's proven false, they don't follow that conclusion through, right? Instead, he says, we must look elsewhere for that hill. Well, why? Why not just take Joseph Smith's word at what he said?
They shift the goalposts. They have to move the goal.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you have to confront the direct implication that has on the foundations of your religious belief.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's a difficult thing to do for anyone.
Or is it Carrie Mulestein who said that he begins with,
yes, it is. I start with the conclusion that everything that comes from the Book of Mormon or divine scripture is true. I then try and fit any evidence I find into that conclusion.
Paradigm. Yeah.
Into that paradigm.
Yeah. So the last slide, if we're ready for it, I was doing some history and I saw this little piece. I had no idea that this was even a thing, but this is from the church's website. Somebody had taken a piece of the well from the Carthage Jail. Joseph Smith was killed, because they wanted to keep hold of that. And I didn't know that. I knew when I went to Nauvoo this last time, I'd heard that one of the reasons why they were moving Joseph and Oliver so much and they were unsure for a long time where their bodies were or were buried is because people wanted to take pieces of them, like their bones or their hair or whatever, which we see reflected with Alvin. And when his Joseph Smith Sr. posted in the newspaper about he was worried that people were going to exhume his son. Anyway, people were wanting to take pieces of that because that's what they did back then. And here somebody's taken a piece of the well. And I just thought that was interesting that we have these things, but nobody once even thought to take pieces of the stone box. I just think that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to your point, Julia, I mean, it literally says this was collected with an envelope containing a lock of Joseph Smith's hair. So that's how attached they are to this idea of like finding these relics or these artifacts is they literally take a piece of Joseph Smith's hair along with this wood chip. It says obtained by Orson K. Whitney. So Orson K. Whitney holds on to these things, but nobody thinks to hold on to a piece of the cement from the stone box, a stone from the stone box. The only account we have after the plates are recovered from it comes from David Whitmer, and they're very mixed on exactly what happens. But even according to that last account from David Whitmer, he says the box was rolled or washed down to the bottom of the hill. And then at least in that 1875 account, he says that he still knew where it was. So it was still identifiable, I guess, as the stone box.
Yeah, it was still there to be seen.
Right. And nobody hangs on to that, but people hang on to an envelope full of Joseph Smith's hair and a piece of this well. That inconsistency I see is just a huge problem.
Well, not even hangs on to it, but just marks off the area or identifies where it is or just in some way preserves it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm not expecting people to go in and take it away, but I would expect the church absolutely to put a little plaque up.
Mm-hmm. This reminds me of also there is another stone box. I don't know how to show screens, but there is a stone box where they kept the original manuscript and they put it in this encasing in the building in the temple, right in the corner. I think
it was the Nauvoo house, wasn't it?
Oh, the Nauvoo house. But that stone box is still there. You can Google that. It's still, people still have that. So like, but again, this was in the 1820s, but it's just interesting to me that there's really no evidence for the stone box at all.
No.
But yeah.
Yeah, the church's relationship to historical artifacts and historical sites is just it's almost an episode of its own. The way in which, at some places they'll absolutely set up shop with taco stands and the works, to try and entice people to come and see these places, and then other things that aren't there that ought to be there, they just quietly ignore. The Hill Cumorah must be such a difficult site for them to manage, knowing that it's not the site of a battle, archaeologically speaking, knowing that none of the physical artifacts that ought to be there to prove the things that Joseph Smith undertook there are actually present. I don't know how they manage it. I would be curious to visit and see how they manage it as a site.
Yeah,
it would be interesting. Yeah, I think that kind of leads to my concluding thoughts on this episode, which is, I was surprised, like I said at the beginning of the episode, that during my faith crisis, I had never actually asked the question, like, well, what about the stone box? Yeah, the plates had to be taken. Yeah, these other artifacts had to be taken by the angel. But what about the stone box? By all accounts, it's just a normal stone box, like a physical stone box that would have existed. And it's interesting that all these accounts that we looked at through the course of this episode seem to vindicate that it was a literal stone box that people saw. It relates to this claim of other stone boxes, and yet it is nowhere to be found. The site, even where the stone box would have existed, is unknown to the church today, which itself is kind of interesting to me based on the dimensions that we were reading about the other stone boxes. It would seem like at least that, to what you were saying, Nemo, would have been flagged, or some record would have been kept of at least that, but we don't have either of those. We don't have a piece of the stone box, any record aside from David Whitmer saying that it was washed down to the bottom of the hill, yet still identifiable as the stone box in some way. That's all we have. And so again, where this comes back to is kind of the purpose of this LDS discussion series in toto, is to look at these things as objectively as we can, set aside bias, and really test, Like, do we see these things showing up in reality the way that they purport to? And I think here, my conclusion from this episode is we just don't. We don't have any record of this stone box actually existing in a way that could be demonstrated the way that we demonstrate normal archaeological finds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I think that for me, the lack of the stone box now, that's not evidence, but also that Joseph Smith said that there was a stone box. Others of those around him, and counting Solomon Spaulding, talked about stone boxes. So it wasn't unique to Joseph. I think if it was unique to Joseph, and we found more of that in history of plates being in stone boxes, which it did happen, but like, it's not unique to Joseph. People around him were talking about it. And so it doesn't feel like an evidence either that he, because a lot of apologists say, oh, there's a stone box, therefore this is another bullseye, that there's an evidence that the church is true or that the Book of Mormon is true. And that's not how that is.
Yeah, the other difference I would point out there is claims of stone boxes and the actual stone boxes are very different things. There were so many claims in early America about these ridiculous archaeological sites, which may or may not have existed, right? And so that's the other thing that's interesting to me about this episode, is thinking about the difference between taking someone's claim itself as evidence versus taking the evidence that supports the claim. Both of the things are important to look at together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Agreed.
Nemo, any closing thoughts from you?
Not really. I think it just really does boil down to, where is it? There's no reason for it to be gone. There's no reason for it not to still be there. It survived 1,000 years. Where is it now? I apologists, tell me, where is it? You know, you seem to be the only ones authorized at the moment to actually answer these sorts of questions that people might have, and you're indirectly authorized, so you can take the fall if you're wrong, I suppose. But just give me an answer. Where is it?
Mm-hmm.
Why should I not be able to walk up to the Hill Cumorah now and find a box in the hillside or a box washed down to the bottom of the hill?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's awful convenient that it existed for like 1,400 years after Moroni, and then within basically 50 years, well, maybe 60 years, it's supposedly destroyed and cannot be recognized in any way. But we don't even have an account saying that. It just kind of disappears from history, which is kind of an interesting point here.
Yeah.
Well, I'll go ahead and close us on this episode of LDS Discussions. Like I talked about at the beginning of this episode, the LDS Discussions series is one of the most important projects to John DeLynn here on Mormon Stories, where we look at Mormon Church truth claims as objectively and with as little bias as we can. It began with the work of a man who's called Mike and his website, ldsdiscussions.com. and builds upon itself. So these episodes are best consumed sequentially, especially if you're a big fan of Nemo's accent. You'll get to listen to a lot of Nemo's accent. Please donate to keep this series alive through Mormon Stories podcast. And please send John your feedback at mormonstories@gmail.com and let him know what you think about this new approach to LDS discussions. Julia and Nemo, thank you very much for being part of today's discussion. I always enjoy talking to you guys about these things. Until next time, everybody, be good to each other, be kind to each other, and see you on the next episode of Mormon Stories podcast and LDS Discussions.